So thanks for joining us to talk about two of my favorite topics, which are blockchain and journalism. I've been covering blockchain for a while, and surprisingly, when this opportunity came up, I thought, wow, blockchain and journalism, that never had occurred to me. So let's dive in. I guess before we start, I know we've all heard so much about blockchain and crypto and all these buzzwords, but I'm sure there are at least a few people in the audience who don't know exactly what we're talking about. So if you could just kind of give us the blockchain 101 primer here.
I can do the best that I can, and I will do that. So it's lovely to see you all. Thanks for hanging around on a Friday afternoon to talk about blockchain and journalism. So blockchain as a word was really not a part of anybody's vernacular, probably, if you go back about 7-8 months, and it wasn't for me. So I spent 6 years at Google helping to build a couple of teams that supported journalism and news. One was called Google for Media, and then the Google News Lab. And this is to answer your question, by the way. I'm going to just do it in a little bit of a roundabout way. But I was sitting at my desk in New York last summer, and I saw a line in morning media from Politico. There was a story from Neiman Labs that said Civil is trying to figure out blockchain and journalism. And I had absolutely no idea what that meant. And I felt embarrassed to say that I was confused. I was like, what is blockchain? What on earth? I'm at Google. I've spent 20 years working in news and technology, and I have no idea what this means. How is that possible? So I reached out to what was Civil then, which was really just a basic marketing website, and 2 or 3 people full-time. And I reached out to Matthew Iles, who's our CEO, and I said, do you mind just meeting with me to sort of talk about what this is? I just want to know more. He said, sure. So we showed up at a cafe together, and it was kind of like an awkward first date, where neither person really knows how the other one feels. Why are you here? What's this all about? He thought I was probably going to invest in Civil, and I wondered if they needed some help. So ultimately, we went on this journey together with a number of others as co-founders. We're now a 22-person company, and we'll be launching in about a month, both our platform and our token. And today we published our Civil white paper. So where does this all land us with blockchain? So I have had numerous conversations with people about what blockchain is over the past 6 months, and I continue to struggle with the right frequency to try to hit people's understanding of what it is. Okay, so this is all preamble to say that I'm going to give you an analogy that I just read this afternoon, a new one, and see if that helps people, okay? Because you hear things like transparent ledger and distributed or decentralized computing, right? How is that different than what we have today? So the analogy that I heard, and then I'll stop, is during playground sports, okay, so playground football. When you're playing the game, everybody participating in the game knows the score. There's no scoreboard, but everybody just knows what the score is. And in order for that knowledge to change to something else, an event has to happen. Somebody scores. And everybody on the field knows that somebody scores, so in their head, the score changes, right? This is a very basic thing. In a similar way, you can think of that as blockchain, right? So the computers that are distributed across this network, and there are sometimes tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of them, all know the score, but they only can change that information if they can verify it, not quickly, as I'm sure you've encountered, but that they can all verify that information, and then everybody knows it and it changes. So that was a really long-winded answer to your first question, but I think it's important because I think blockchain as a term started out as being either foreign or confusing, evolved into something that people associated with bad actors and maybe people just trying to cash in and make a bunch of money, and they lost sight of the underpinnings of the technology and how cryptographers have been working in blockchain for many years, right? Bitcoin and all of the hype around it grew out of sort of the last half of last year, but the space, Bitcoin had been around for many years, right? So the technology may feel new to people, but the concepts and how it works has been around for some time.
Mm-hmm. And the one that I like is that it's literally a chain of blocks.
It is, yeah. So you can think of each piece of verified data, whatever that is, creates another block, right? So another piece of verified, and how that gets verified is all done through computational algorithms that people loan their processing power to. And to generate a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, in some cases, there's mining that's done. right? So this is where people are offering their computational power to participate in the generation of this with Bitcoin currency, right? And in the way that you can think of gold as a finite resource in theory, right? So there's a scarcity. It's tough to mine gold. It's not easy. It's valuable as a conductor, for various reasons. So it's a resource that people need, but it can only be pushed into the system at sort of a particular rate, right? You can't flood the market with gold. It takes a while to mine it. So there's a timeline for all this. Same thing with Bitcoin or other types of cryptocurrencies where there's mining. There have to be parameters about how this works, right? And this is where these very complex algorithms come into play.
So why journalism? I mean, we all know, obviously, that the revenue model for journalism is struggling. Many of us here in the room have felt that disruption that technology has brought to journalism. Is the proposition here that technology is also going to be the thing to ultimately save us?
So I wish I could say this was my idea, but because I came across this through Matthew, so I want to give him absolute credit for conceiving of this idea. Of course, it's evolved over the past 6-7 months. I, by the way, have never worked at a startup and certainly never been a co-founder, and I will tell you that in your, let's call it the later stages of your career, it's a thing. It's a lot of time and it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of people who are very thoughtful and very creative and committed to figuring this out. So his concept at a really high level, if you take sort of the two big offerings of what blockchain hopefully provides to journalism, one is about immutability and permanence, okay? So last year in the US, there was a site that many of you may not have heard of called DNA Info, okay? So Joe Ricketts was the billionaire funder of DNA Info. There was one in New York and Chicago and elsewhere. And at one point last year, he decided to pull all his funding out. Now, these journalists were laid off. That's bad. The archive of all of that content was removed from the internet for a period of time before enough bad PR got back to him, Joe Ricketts, and he put some of it back on the internet. But the point is that this happens a lot, right? We can think of other examples with Peter Thiel and Gawker and so on, right? So blockchain, because the content is distributed across these tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of computers, there is not one copy on a centralized server to just get rid of. It's sort of everywhere. So in that way, it creates this permanence. Now, there are trade-offs with that, which we can certainly get into, but that we see as valuable to journalists. The second piece is about governance. So what are we building? What is Civil doing, right? What is this thing exactly? And then we talk about it in a number of different ways. We say ecosystem, we say marketplace, platform, right? So you think of a platform like Airbnb or Uber or Facebook or Etsy or eBay, right? They're scalable networks that people can plug their business into and find customers to buy and sell with, right? That's really what they are at a high level. So what we're creating is a platform that is built around journalism. So imagine, this is what we like to say to people. Imagine, take everything that's bad about journalism for a second. Bad actors, broken revenue models, not great ad exchanges, not great incentivization for people to participate or be engaged necessarily, trolls, all that stuff. Like, let's just like put it in a box for a second, okay? And imagine if we could just start again. So in service of everything that is about journalism, that is what we are trying to help create. Not us, not the civil media company. This is where blockchain and decentralization comes in. Because what we want to do is allow the community to drive this platform. So the civil token that we'll be launching alongside the platform enables people to vote and participate in the governance structure. And I could go on, and I'll let you ask me if you're interested in how it all works, because for us, this is the utility purpose of the token. And it's what enables people to hold newsrooms accountable, so to challenge a newsroom based on the content that they may have published if it's misinformation, for them to allow newsrooms to either enter the platform or to have them deplatformed. So we're creating an entire governance stack, is how I like to think of it. And the civil token, which is built on the Ethereum blockchain, so it's an ERC20 token, allows people to cast their vote. It's just a piece of software, okay? And so there are instances where people can vote, challenge newsrooms, and so on. on top of that, so that's sort of the base layer of governance, if you will, the community, right? Civil token holders, which people can purchase if they want. They don't have to have them to consume content on the sites, the newsrooms that are publishing. I'll get into that in a bit. Above that is our civil constitution. So we published this last week. You can kind of think of this as like a terms of service. And it's one thing that we're not doing is reinventing journalism ethics, right? I mean, that's pretty well established. But we've spelled this out, and we've added some governance to it, a bit like the US Constitution, which sort of suggests to the people, hey, you have a problem with kind of how things are going, or you don't like the way this particular person is leading, here's how you should go figure it out, right? So that is, we are literally putting the authority of civil into the hands of the Constitution. And then on top of that, we're creating a nonprofit, separate, independent of civil, called the Civil Foundation. And within that will be the Civil Journalism Council, so like the Supreme Court. They will have total authority over what happens within this platform. There are ways that the community can appeal that with supermajority and so on. So you can kind of start to see this whole ecosystem starts to come together, and that is something that only blockchain can allow.
Wow, so there's so much to unpack there. But I'm going to start.
I told you I have a tendency to go on long, and I already feel like I've misplaced my water. Sorry.
I'm going to start with trust, because
Trust, yes,
when
please.
we talk about blockchain, one of the things that's always constantly coming up is this idea of trust, and blockchain removes the need for trusted intermediaries, such as, for example, central banks, which needs a lot of incumbents, such as central bankers, to feel very uncomfortable. We know in journalism that, to some extent, public trust in journalism has eroded in recent years. So how can blockchain help to restore that trust in civil's model?
Thank you for asking that. I have a couple of answers, and I'll try to keep them relatively short. But so one is that blockchain itself, as you alluded to, is transparent in nature, right? So the transactions that are facilitated within the network are there for anybody to see, right? So if I give you 1 ETH or Ethereum, it does take some time for all of the networks to sort of process this sort of thing, but it's all very visible and transparent. So it sees that Alex now has 1 ETH from Daniel. Yes, verified transaction done. There's no bank, there's no central authority, right? So that, in that way, people sometimes refer to blockchain as being trustless, because if you can see everything that's going on, do you really need to feel this kind of human sense of trust, right? Which is a sort of it's a personal thing about empathy, and you can see people and you kind of react to them. And with the technology, though, it's not that way, right? You can't look at a person and trust them, but you start to see that these things are verified, authenticated, and you can see it and you start to trust it, right? So that's thing one. The other is, and actually there's sort of 2 other answers. So the one other is that, so when newsrooms come to civil, right? So, and I'm sure people are thinking, what on earth is this person talking about? Come to civil, what is this, right? So if you're a publisher, if you're a newsroom and you want to use civil, what do you get? Okay, so you'll have a WordPress CMS experience with a number of different APIs and plugins and so on. So that's kind of just the basic tools for anybody to come in and publish content. Attached to that, you'll have our business center, which will allow for customized monetization. Want to do a subscription? Great. Want to do it on the atomic level of an article? Fine. You want to do a membership drive, micro-tipping, whatever you want. Totally up to you, okay? And so a newsroom will have the opportunity to push their content when they publish it. So just like you would with any other CMS, you say, I'm going to push it to the web. So it's a consumer experience, minimizes the latency attached to blockchain. Ta-da, here it is out in the world. Then they have the option to push it to the blockchain. If they push it to the blockchain, there is a small cost associated with that. It's called gas, right? So people using their computing power, they gotta get paid somehow. So there are fractions of cents that get applied to processing transactions. So it gets pushed to the blockchain. Now, if you're a newsroom and you've published your content, so if you think in your head for a second, because I don't have any visuals, so you think medium, right? So if that's kind of in your head for a second, what it looks like, imagine that you could see the log of all of the content that that newsroom had ever published in its history. So sort of the ultimate transparency, right? It's not right in front of you when you go to the article, but if you really want to see it, you can. So that's another way we're trying to open up trust, just pure transparency, right? The other is we're talking to entities like the Credibility Coalition, the Trust Project with Sally Lehrman. You know, we want to incorporate, and we're going to do some of this at launch, but we want to incorporate these credibility indicators that have a lot of merit, and there's a ton of great research being done about how they work, whether it's for an author byline, whether it's for a particular, knowing that the reporter was on the ground, right? Where did they get their data set from? All of these things who is this reporter? What else have they done? Did they make some mistakes in the past, right? Just some things that start to make people feel like, oh, okay, I would like to read that, right? And I trust them enough to read something else. So there are going to be a lot of things that we have to think about both on the back end and the front end in terms of people's experience with civil. And we're not going to figure this all out at the beginning, none of this entirely, but the trust part of it is critical. And I think the last thing that I will say is that civil's mission is journalism. So we're not a blockchain company that was looking around for some solution somewhere. We're a journalism company that thought blockchain was useful. So we as an entity want to extol that virtue, if you will, as much as we possibly can, because these are the types of philosophical existential conversations we have at Civil almost every day. So we need help. We need help. Like, in this journey, so I mentioned there are 22 of us at Civil, right? We also have a partnership with Old Town Media, so led by Tom McGovern, Josh Benson, and Catherine Lair. Used to be at Politico, founded Capital New York, was managing editor at New York Observer. They've been advisors for us for a long time. We announced a partnership with the European Journalism Center. I was in Perugia to make that announcement about a month ago, and the News Integrity Initiative to help to foster startups in Europe. We decided to co-match the grant that they were going to provide to startups to just try to sort of let 1,000 flowers bloom, right? And we also so last year we received $5 million from Consensus, which is the venture studio attached to Ethereum, and we allocated $1 million of that to grant to newsrooms who wanted to build on Civil. And all we asked was that they try to adhere to local, policy, investigative, and international as their area of focus. And we gave them cash, fiat, just to help pay the bills because they're working individuals. And all of this, by the way, is about journalists getting paid. This is not about free content. This is not about just do it because you think it's a service, which we all do as somebody who's been in journalism since I can remember, that yes, it's a service. Yes, it feels good. But I think there was somebody up here earlier who said we still have to pay the bills. We still have to get paid. Making that connection with people is hard. And I'm not suggesting that we're going to solve all of that right away. But we just see an opportunity, and I think I've actually lost my train of thought as I've gone on here.
Fine.
So I'll let you take over. But so to help, so we've been working with all these different partners to try to pull them in and to try to demonstrate that we want to seed the industry as much as we can. So we had this $1 million, we granted it, we gave them some fiat and some civil tokens to these newsrooms. We've announced to date, I want to say 9 newsrooms, and I can get into more about them, but as I say, they cover local policy, investigative, international. We're very close to announcing a number of others, and in about a month, they will all start to publish their content into the world. And so that for us is of course tremendously exciting.
Well, you touched on money, and I think that's kind of an important discussion. So in what ways is this platform going to help with some of those revenue challenges? I know you talked a little bit about micropayments, which I'm really interested in.
Yeah, so I mentioned, in that scenario where you're a newsroom and you have the CMS and you have your business center, this customization means that you can set it up kind of however you want. And we're going to have a CRM so that newsrooms can start to learn from their analytics, what's working. Are people actually signing up for our membership or our patronage model? Great, let's double down on that with the next sort of campaign that we do, or our newsletter, right? Whatever it is that needs to tie together audience engagement. I think one of the challenges that we have faced is that because we are very much trying to be a decentralized entity, right? So we as a civil media company are not going to build everything. We're not going to create all the business models that newsrooms and journalists need and want. We can't, and we shouldn't. And so in that way, you can sort of think of us a bit like Apple. Okay, so I'm going to use another sort of from the tech world analogy here. So Apple creates iOS, right? And launches a handful of apps back with the iPhone, right? Weather app, calculator, right? Just like kind of a handful of nice apps. Nothing extraordinary, but they worked. And not long after, they open up the App Store, of course, right? And developers come in, and they make way better apps than all the Apple ones, right? And they start making money off that. And Apple says, oh, we're so happy that you've set up your businesses here and you make money. We're just going to take a little piece of those transactions, and that's going to help us to keep you going, and right, this virtuous cycle back and forth. So in a similar way, we want to lure developers, producers, people with different services, a freelancer network, whatever it is, come in, build on the Civil protocol, okay? So a protocol, right, just like HTTPS, just another way that computers talk to each other. Come in and build on that, and buy and sell your wares in our marketplace, again, sort of like in the eBay model, and have at it, right? And that's where we start to think about our own business model in all of this. But the newsrooms, in terms of how they earn money, or I think maybe another way to think about it is achieve a path to sustainability, right? How do they think about that sustainable future? That is totally up to them. They have complete autonomy. They can set that up however they want, and we do not take any piece of those transactions. So that's, for us, that's sort of like sacred ground. We don't want to get between newsroom and audience. That's sort of the beauty of this. And there are no ads, just to be clear. So this is, newsrooms and journalists are going to have to think a little bit differently in terms of monetization and business models. And we're going to hope that we can provide a foundation, and that the developer community can come in and say, oh, no, I got this other cool micro payment thing that's going to make it a lot faster. Here, everybody use this. It's open source. You know, I'll just take this fee. You can pay me in Civil, or you can pay me in cash, or whatever it is, fine. So you can kind of start to see how at scale this starts to get a little bit interesting.
Mm-hmm. I know that being community-driven is a really big part of this model, and there are a number of other community-driven news organizations that have not necessarily succeeded. Mm-hmm. One of the things I know that's been an issue is actually generating that engagement with the community. So people always say, well, we want to shape news, we don't agree with where the news is going, and then you have these great initiatives come out saying, you know, participate with us, tell us what you want the news to be about, and then suddenly that audience engagement isn't there.
Yes.
So what is Civil doing, or what do you intend to do to make sure that you generate the kind of engagement that you're going to need?
Yes. Oh, well, so, and I want to respond to your question as I hear you say that, I think about how, like the way that you were saying what we need. It's almost what the newsrooms need. And only just to think of sort of like Civil, we're going to have to figure out our own business model, right? How does Civil make money? We're going to raise some money from this token sale, and we're going to figure out these transactions from, you know, fees from developers down the road. But eventually we have to figure out how to be sustainable too, right? But each of these newsrooms needs to figure that out. And the community engagement part is a huge piece of this. So, you know, I met Jennifer Brendel when she was doing Curious City in Chicago, which, if you haven't come across, Harkin is her company. And she was, I would say, almost revolutionary in the beginning of her journey on this, back in, let's call it 2013, maybe, 2014. And she worked for WBEZ, which is the local Chicago radio station, and she would take reporters out into the field, or she would go with reporters out into the field, and they would solicit questions from the community. What do you care about in your neighborhood? Could be as small as a pothole in the road, could be that the crosswalk isn't safe by the school, could be that the city council is corrupt, whatever. Just what are your things, right? Again, doesn't feel as revolutionary now, perhaps, but she just tried to bring people in, tell us what, you know, she made the questions. I think she had almost like kind of like a Reddit up-down vote on the questions, so that people could, if they didn't want to suggest a question or they couldn't think of one, they could at least still participate in the process. And then at the end of that, they took, I think, like the top 10 or 20, and they said, all right, these are the stories that we're going to do as part of our Curious City project, and we're going to take the people who suggested those questions with us out on the story. So you can come with us, you can ask your question to the mayor or to the nonprofit, you know, head, VP or something, or just like be in the story with me and help me make sure that I, as the reporter, get this right. And that, to me, was sort of like, what? Really? Because, so, just, you know, I'm honestly not here to talk about me, and I'm way rather talk about Civil in many ways, but I was a reporter at the Vancouver Sun for a couple of years, and I covered business, and I covered local events, and I covered technology, and it was, as somebody who was a very introverted, shy child, which you may not believe at this particular moment, but back then, it was painfully awkward for me to imagine going out and interviewing people. I didn't feel like I could do it very well, like I would stumble over my question or something, or I would be embarrassed about what I asked, right? So I really had to push myself to leave my desk at the Sun, and I had a great assistant managing editor back then named I called him Graham Rockingham, sorry. Everybody called him Rocky. And he would always try to like kick me out of my desk. And he's like, what are you sitting here? Like, get out into the community. Stop sitting at your desk. Get off the phone. Go talk to people, right? That was a hard leap for me as somebody who just wasn't that inclined to go talk to people, even though I loved writing and I loved reporting. So I just use that as sort of an analogy that it is hard. It's hard. It's hard to hear from people. It's hard to be out in the community. It's hard to hear criticism. It's hard to hear that things are happening that maybe you can't report on, or that it's too much, or people ask you things and you're not sure what's going on. So we want to try to open up or offer newsrooms ways to open up that direct relationship in ways that feel beneficial. And in this model, so when I mentioned newsrooms, publish, citizens pay, there is no third party, right? So newsrooms, I hope, get to start thinking about things like, wow, how can we like really engage people here, right? We have a number of local newsrooms. I'm going to go back to Chicago for a second, which is just, that's a coincidence. But one of the local newsrooms that we helped to fund is called Block Club Chicago. And they are the, let's call it the remnants of DNA Info. They were in Chicago, and they were unemployed. And Seamus Toomey was one of the leaders of their newsroom. He came to us, and he said, you know, I have this team of journalists who is out of work. We don't know a single thing about blockchain. We love the city of Chicago. We're really worried that our local newsroom here has gone away. And how do we get this back and running? And we said, let's figure it out. So they came up with a name for their newsroom, which is Block Club Chicago, which apparently has a connotation for people in Chicago. I don't quite know the whole Block Club story, but the point is that they wanted to reach out to the community and let people know that they were back, or that they were coming back, and help them understand blockchain and get them involved. So they did a Kickstarter campaign. And we said, okay, I hope that goes well. Is this a bellwether for how civil's going to go down? And just what's the interest in local news? So they set up their Kickstarter campaign, tried to raise $25,000 over 30 days, essentially. And I can still remember like sitting at my desk in Brooklyn and hearing about this and checking out their Kickstarter campaign in the beginning, and I was thinking, oh, shit. Like, what if they don't raise any money? What if nobody cares about local news? What if our theory, our hypothesis is totally off, that community engagement and people being involved in journalism is just like dead, right? So we watched as this campaign went on, and so in, I want to say less than a week, they had raised $185,000.
Wow.
Like from something like 3,000 people, right? Which it ended up becoming the largest journalism Kickstarter project in history. So I think, we think there's something here, and we're just trying to figure out the right ways to work with people, right? I mean, this is the big learning for me. We're all figuring this out, right? And we're trying in our way, in Civil's way, right? And we're going to be a for-profit company, so this is not, this isn't all altruism, nor is journalism, for God's sake, right? I mean, it's an enterprise, and people need to think about revenue and businesses and sustainability. And so we're just trying to wrap our arms around the journalism community and say, look, if we all do this together, most of us, some of us, right? It's not going to be utopia. There are going to be a lot of things that go wrong. It's right, just like democracy's messy. Did the U.S. Constitution solve everything in America? Not exactly, right? So there are always, this is where I've just had to make peace with everything that we're doing. This is a journey, right? There is no solving misinformation. There is no solving verification. There is no solving trust. There's not a day when we're all just going to be like, whew, God finally figured all that out, right?
But you can improve upon it.
You can improve upon it, yes.
And I noticed that you've set aside $1 million for your sort of first fleet of 100 respected journalists. So why is that an important piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, so those are those newsrooms that fall into local policy, investigative, and international, right? So Block Club Chicago is one. We have another up in the Hudson Valley called The River. We have one in California called Popula, run by Maria Bustillos, who was an editor at The New Yorker for a long time. And she's got a team of something like 15 journalists that are working with her now. We announced, so Cannabis Wire is another one, which is all about the massive industry around marijuana and the regulation of it. We've got one called Documented, which is all about the immigrant experience. I being one in the U.S. as a Canadian and an American, but it's got a remit of a lot of what's going on in New York, but they're looking at the immigrant experience more broadly. We've got just a lot of different sort of flavors of newsrooms, right? So if you think about kind of like in that eBay example, right? And Pierre Omidyar, when he created eBay, there were people who thought he was a little crazy. Like, who needs eBay? There were flea markets and garage sales, and wow, who's going to buy something from somebody like around the world and wait for shipping? I mean, it didn't make any sense to most people back then, right? So, and the one instance that in the lore of eBay, and I assume this is true, by the way, I don't have a second source on this, but that somebody as a seller set up shop on eBay to sell broken laser pointers, okay? And at that point, when somebody saw that it was about broken laser pointers, like, well, this is just kind of like a joke now, right? Nobody's going to ever buy that. So we've kind of reached the end of the usefulness of this. But somebody bought broken laser pointers because they collected broken laser pointers, right? So the point is that there are niche markets for products, for services, for news content, I would argue. I mean, we have a newsroom coming that I'm a little reluctant to say just because we haven't quite launched into the world. But it will be an investigative journalism newsroom that's focused on Southeast Asia. And the woman who's running this newsroom is a rock star. And I met her in Berlin when she was there, between living in Bangkok and going back to Myanmar. And she's got this phenomenal network of investigative journalists all over Southeast Asia. And she's going to be setting up shop on Civil and trying to bring stories to the rest of the world that have kind of like a human narrative to them, right? So yes, they might be about microloans in India and some of the difficulties around repayment and the sort of corruption that goes on. But there's going to be a human element to these that hopefully translates to people who live anywhere. So there's going to be these very local newsrooms like Block Club Chicago or The River, and then we're going to have newsrooms that have perhaps more of sort of like a global citizen perspective, but all of them are going to have to find audiences, to your point about community and audience engagement. And this is where we struggle a little bit because we don't want to be in the business of telling these newsrooms what to do, right? That's not our job. That's not what Civil, we're trying to build all the technology to allow that to happen. At the same time, we don't want to be sort of off in the distance and not care about these newsrooms, because of course we do. So we're trying to figure out ways to sort of walk that line between being decentralized, and like, here you go, everybody, and being a little bit of a centralized clearinghouse or like a repository of useful open source learnings about everything from business models to case studies to audience engagement. Whatever everybody's learning across the network should be shared, right? I mean, in a perfect world, and I'm going to go here just for a second because I know that, believe me, every day is about all the things that could go wrong. But in a perfect world, if there were all these newsrooms that had slightly different variations to them, we haven't even gotten into breaking news and all the rest of it, but if there were just think of a whole rainbow of different types of newsrooms, right? And they're all in there trying to sell their content and find audiences. Of course, it's going to be tough and challenging. There's going to be a lot to navigate. But in theory, there's a possibility that they can sort of, like a rising tide lifts all boats, right? I was at a conference recently where there were competing newsrooms sitting next to each other on the stage. And there was sort of this sentiment of like, why are we trying to drive each other out of business? We're looking at a lot of other newsrooms that are suffering. Meanwhile, advertisers are making money. Social media platforms are making lots of money, and we're in this pit just kind of going at each other for the last ad dollar, which seems a little counterproductive, right? So is there some way that the industries can start to work together and possibly share ways to get better and not cut into each other's markets because you have a slightly different audience? So, you know, in that, like eBay as a conference for all of its buyers and sellers, right? They're not trying to put each other out of business. They're trying to find their core audience, the people who care and will pay for whatever they offer.
So we've gotten into a lot of the sort of nitty-gritty as to how this will all operate. So I want to throw you kind of a high-level theoretical question. As you've probably heard or read, for those who don't know, co-founder Vitalik Buterin, who co-founded Ethereum, or founded, I guess, Ethereum with a couple of other people helping him, recently got into a spat with CoinDesk, which is a website that does journalism based on blockchain and cryptocurrency topics, and was quite upset about sort of the values of journalism and how the story had been handled, and went to Twitter to make a comment about how this is why pundits, he referred to journalists as pundits, should be replaced by prediction markets. So what do you think is the role of journalism in this sort of blockchain and community-driven world? Is there still a role for journalists? If I'm going out and people are telling me, here are the issues that matter to us, here's the questions you should ask, do I still have a job? I mean, we know that the robots are already after our jobs, but do we need to be worried about the blockchains now too?
Not as far as we're concerned. So so I'll answer your question. Do journalists matter and do we need them? Yes, period. So I think the comment that was made is, I think there was a lot of snark in there that was probably very overblown. I think that when he, I think so this is where there's an interesting tension, not tension. So you can imagine I came into the blockchain world and had to figure out blockchain. Now imagine the blockchain world figuring out journalism, right? Journalism, in just as many ways, has nuances and complexities and things that people have to figure out all the time, right? And I'll just tell you a really quick story. So we were in Berlin and we held this meetup, and it was a modest meetup. It was, we're a startup. We had like I think we have people like free wine and invited people in to learn about us. And we had a good turnout. We had about 30 people show up. So at one point, I was standing there talking to a couple of co-founders, and we were thinking, oh, this is nice. People have come to our little meetup here, feeling pretty good about things. And, as you do when you're talking to somebody, you can see somebody hovering kind of like within your line of sight, and you're not really sure and then there's that, yep, they want to talk to me, right? So I thought, I'll talk to this person, right? So he came up to me, and so his body language was sort of like this, right? So very skeptical, clearly just kind of like a bit bothered by, us and so on, which was odd to me. And I said, hi, I'm Daniel from Civil. And he said, well, I'm an engineer, and I'm not doing a German accent, by the way, but he had a very, very strong German accent, and I just couldn't quite hear. We were in a bar, right? And I was sort of straining to hear him, and he was an engineer who, I can't remember his name, I'm going to call him Stefan, but he was saying to me, he asked me a question like, so Ethereum at scale, if you're trying to process all these transactions, there's no way that the bandwidth of the network has the capacity to absolutely process all of those things, especially when you're talking about video. And he's kind of like going on about these very technical things, and I couldn't quite hear him, right? And I was like, Stefan, I'm sorry, I don't have a great answer for you right now. We're sort of like here. I'd love to, hear more from you. Maybe join our Slack channel. Here's my card, like whatever, please. But this doesn't feel like a great environment for me to connect with you. And he said, well, I don't want to be bothered with that. And I said, but wait, okay. I said, you're here. You came to our meetup. Why are you here? What brought you here? You're a blockchain engineer. You must care about journalism a little bit. He said, well, yeah, I'm working on this database of how holding German politicians accountable for what they say. So I'm going to create a database of everything they promised on their campaign, and then everything that they've actually fulfilled in their time in office. And I was like, Stefan, this is exactly what we're trying to create. We're trying to create a marketplace for you to sell that or whatever you want to do with it as you wish, right? And he was like, okay. So like journalists would find that useful? And I'm like, yes, they would, right? So I'm like trying to help educate him about the processes and the complexities involved with journalism, and he's trying to help me understand the challenges involved with blockchain. And we had this civil, I'm going to say, discussion, and we sort of finally met each other on this wavelength. And by the end of it, I said, look, well, thanks for coming. We need help. Please, whatever you want to, whatever level of involvement you want to do. I know earlier you told me you didn't want to join our Slack channel. He's like, all right, I'll give you my email. So he got out his phone. So the point is that in this noisy, cacophonous, exhausting world that we live in between journalism and misinformation and what's true and what's not and all the technology involved, I think our hope is we're just trying to find a better way forward, and that as human beings, there's an opportunity for us to find some common ground, right? We don't want to be seen as this like liberal left-wing blockchain cryptocurrency thing. At the same time, we don't want to lean too far over, or I don't even know if we could lean too far over, but over to the right. This isn't about politics, right? It's about facts and journalism and storytelling and all the things that any of us in this room thought was important to get into journalism for. So that's
Amazing. I could talk to you about this for hours, but I'm going to open the floor to the audience in case there are any questions from our audience. Okay. Well. Yeah.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So for somebody who works at an organization that has tried to embed itself or work with other platforms in the past, would your hope be that with Civil, that if somebody wanted to experiment and start publishing there, that their long-term plan would be to engage fully with Civil and to shut down their website?
Great question.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. So I think I will take your question as sort of like what opportunity do, let's call it, legacy publishers have on Civil? Is that fair? Okay. So, and I'll answer you and you. I have a hard time looking across. So we've been talking to a lot of different publishers. Okay. I'll throw out some names. I'm not trying to name drop, but just to give you a sense of sort of the breadth of who we've been talking to, right? So we've talked to Vice and the New York Times, and we've talked to The Guardian, and we've talked to some slightly smaller publications, including quite hyper-local ones, about what does it mean for them to literally take their shop and move it over to Civil. Now, I've brought that question up to our lead engineer, and he's such a yes, we'll figure this out kind of guy. So he was sort of like, yes, we can figure this out. So there's a technological solution to this that I don't know that we have immediately. There's going to be some amount of porting content over from centralized servers over to us, which involves this. I described this idea of pushing it to the web, or sort of like an AWS, right? Like a typical Amazon Web Services server. So to the web, and then to the blockchain. There's also something called IPFS. If anybody's come across IPFS. If you haven't, it has a wonderful name. The acronym is the Interplanetary File System. And this is sort of a way, yes, so this is sort of a way of kind of it's like the switchboard operator, right? From, back, where does this thing go? How does this thing get verified? Like a centralized thing that sends this off. Anyway, the point is that there would be some amount of work to be done. So for now, what we're saying to legacy publishers is come and open a newsroom that's not totally off-brand, that doesn't have any ads, it's direct to your audience, that you can just experiment and play around with monetization, right? See what works. Start, bite-sized, small, whatever you want. And we've had a few conversations with what we sort of think of them as newsroom partners, right? So, and in this way, if they want to work with us, or if any of you want to work with us, we don't want anybody's money, okay? So we don't want money. All we want is just amazing quality journalism content. That's it, right? And we'll compensate these newsrooms with Civil tokens. So we'll say, okay, if you can dedicate 2 reporters to this pilot for 4 months, what would their salaries be, right? And so we try to meet at that with Civil tokens and maybe add a premium and all the rest of it. Because when we launch the token in about a month from now, and the sale will go on for a number of days or weeks, the token will have a real value. There's only ever going to be a finite number of them. And if you are a Civil token holder, of course, in theory, the value hopefully goes up. This isn't what we talk about. It's a utility token for the voting. But a newsroom could have these tokens, and they could participate in the voting. They could cash them in. They'll be liquid after we launch, right? So if a newsroom comes to us and they're like, yeah, we'd love to set up this operation. We have to pay these journalists. We can't just give them your nice little shiny tokens. We actually need to pay them cash. What we say is, well, okay. If you need to cash them out to pay your journalists to participate in this newsroom on Civil, totally understand. All we say is probably not a path to sustainability, right? If you want to really treat this as an experiment, think about the ways that those 2 people and that newsroom could create sustainability without thinking about Civil tokens for a second, right? But we don't prevent people from cashing them in. So I hope that mostly answers your question.
And are you doing an initial coin offering or an ICO for this token?
We are. Well, so we're selling our token And I want to give you an exact date, but we just don't have one yet. We'll be announcing it very soon. If you are interested in learning more, can I give a little pitch for?
Absolutely.
So we have a Telegram group. So if anybody uses Telegram, it's big in the crypto blockchain world, as I'm sure you've discovered. We have a Telegram group, which is that is the place where we will announce our token sale. The platform itself will be launched not quite simultaneously, but right around the same time. So, you mentioned token sales or token launches and so on. One of the big sort of black eyes on this whole economy is that people launch tokens on the backs of white papers and then someday they'll make something. So we're this crazy moonshot company, so we're doing both at the same time. So that's where the token will be available, the platform will launch, and then once all the tokens have been distributed, you'll be able to use it for governance.
And just really quickly, I know you throw out the word utility token. I'm assuming then that you're not going the regulated securities token route.
Correct. So it's not a security. We definitely don't want people to think of it as that. And I think what I'll say on that is that so we're working with journalists, and in particular a lot of investigative journalists. The last thing that Civil wants to do is to become the story, if you know what I mean. So we're trying to do this all as above board as we possibly can. We have 4 legal firms on retainer. We created our own insurance company. If you have never created an insurance company before, I'm here to tell you it's a fascinating experience. But it's all about liability and for newsrooms. So we've had to try to think of a lot of things for the foundation of this. And our website is joincivil.com. That's the last thing to say. Yes.
Is that SIBYL or CIVIL or something else?
So the CIVIL is the name of our site or our platform, and then the token abbreviation will be CVL.
Great. I think that's all that we have time for, but if you're able to stick around and folks can ask you their questions, that would be fantastic.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you all.
And
Thank you
all for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming, everyone. Please thank our sponsors. If you see O&A staff on the way out and volunteers, they put in a lot of work to make today happen. Otherwise, please get out and enjoy the city and have a great weekend. Thank you.